Now, once you've packaged that all together, we're to the penultimate step, which is publishing your IEPD. Publication of an IEPD allows for future search, discovery, and reuse of it in other information exchanges. So it's a good thing to do. The discovery and reuse leads to greater understanding of the IEPD, reduced development costs and effort when people want to do similar exchanges, and increased collaboration overall. If you're doing an IEPD, you can look and find other people's work and ask them questions, and maybe they'll answer. They don't have to, but hopefully they will. Similarly, if you publish your IEPD, if somebody takes that work and reuses it to try to do their own exchange, they can call you, contact you for information about what you did, and that fosters collaboration all around. So how do you publish these things? Well, generally it means uploading it to some sort of repository. IEPD repositories are online systems that enable search, discovery, and reuse of IEPDs. Publication generally consists of uploading something to the repository and adding in some of the metadata. So if you've used the Work with IEPDs tool that Georgia Tech has, that tool also acts as a repository. So you upload all your pieces to it, and it can return you a packaged up IEPD, but it also doubles as a repository for those IEPDs. So for IEPDs, publish them to as many as you can that are relevant to the exchange, because then that gets more exposure for it, more people can find it, more people can reuse it, everything's better all around. If you're developing a large number of IEPDs, it may be worth your while to have a local repository so that you can go and find other stuff you've done. How local depends on what your needs are and how many other agencies you work with. Maybe it's a statewide repository, maybe it's a citywide repository, and maybe it's in just a small locality or just one agency or one office, something like that. But there's a whole broad spectrum of ways that you can do this. Now, we've seen this slide before too when we talked in the first part of this whole presentation on IEPDs. I talked about looking up your stuff in repositories, and we're going to talk about it in a little more detail now again, but this slide is review. There's an IEPD clearinghouse that contains metadata about IEPDs, but then points to where they're actually housed elsewhere. There's a NIEM.gov online repository, and that's linked into Georgia Tech's Work with IEPDs tool. That's what it actually is. So it contains actual IEPDs, but in addition to containing them, it's a tool for assembling them. You put up the different artifacts, and it puts them all together in the right way. And then I said before, DHS has a repository as well, about which I know virtually nothing, other than they have a repository of their own for IEPDs. The IEPD Clearinghouse, which is actually funded by the Department of Justice, provides information on a variety of IEPDs that have been submitted by individuals and organizations who have developed the NIEM. Provides information about the IEPD, but the physical IEPD itself, well, I guess it's not really physical, but the files, the actual IEPD file, is stored by the IEPD author somewhere else. So it contains a pointer to it. A major strength of the IEPD Clearinghouse is that it has a large number of mature NIEM-conformant IEPDs, things like Amber Alerts, LEX, NDEX. It goes back a long time, way back to the GJXDM days, which are the early days pre-NIEM. So the IEPD Clearinghouse really has a vast storehouse of information. And it has newer IEPDs as well. Don't think that it's all out-of-date stuff. But there's a lot of value to being able to access a number of really mature IEPDs that may have gone through several versions to get to the point they are today. The NIEM.gov online repository is really that Work with IEPDs tool. It's an online repository available as part of the general GTRI toolset that stores the IEPDs in the repository to make them searchable. Again, it stores the actual IEPDs. Now, that's partially due to its unique functionality, which includes building the IEPDs within itself, where you upload the artifacts and it packages up the IEPD. It also can let you register those IEPDs with other repositories and manage your IEPDs, including the contents of them. So you can go and replace artifacts as you have new versions of the IEPD and automatically create new versions of it. So a very powerful tool. Now, its downside is it's not as old as the IEPD Clearinghouse, so it's not going to have IEPDs that are quite as mature as the IEPD Clearinghouse has, but it also has a lot of extra functionality that the Clearinghouse doesn't. So, use them both, try them both. And then a little information about DHS's Data Architecture Repository. Now again, I have absolutely no personal time or experience with this particular repository, so we're just going to take this slide as information directly from DHS. It's a publication and sharing environment used to promote discovery and reuse of DHS assets and information exchanges. It's dedicated to IEPD search and discovery, provides information and storage of IEPDs and the data artifacts themselves. functionality as searching, artifact ownership, and staging of IEPDs for publication. So you can build them all up there and then make them public later. So again, I don't know any more about this repository than what's on this slide. And if you're from the Children, Youth, and Family Services community, you probably don't care, and that's okay. But if you are from a DHS-related community watching these materials, then you probably do care, and you're going to want to go out and find more information about it. So a few words on implementation. The NIEM itself has a limited scope. The NIEM is an application-level specification used to structure the format of data within an information exchange. In other words, it's the payload document. The NIEM is all about that XML document, XML instance document that holds the actual data. But when you're actually going to implement an exchange, that payload document is wrapped in several different messaging structures and layers. And those things will take care of things like privacy, they'll take care of security, they'll take care of all the messaging stuff. The NIEM, meanwhile, intentionally remains technology agnostic to maintain interoperability between organizations. In other words, the NIEM doesn't tell you how to send it. The NIEM tells you, well, it doesn't even tell you how to format it, but the NIEM gives you a tool set for you to determine and define how to format the payload document. But it says absolutely nothing about what that document's going to live inside, what kind of envelope you're going to send it in, what kind of headers go on that, what kind of stuff happens as it gets transferred from one organization to another. This is all a long-winded way of saying that implementation is out of the scope of the NIEM. Look at this diagram. The middle part there is the scope of the NIEM, commonly formatted data. The NIEM is about the payload document, the instance document, the XML document with XML info in it. Everything else is out of scope. Your legacy databases are out of scope for the NIEM. NIEM doesn't care. Your interfaces between legacy databases and creating the XML, that's out of scope for the NIEM as well. The NIEM doesn't care. What layers of messaging protocol you wrap around the payload document to send it from place to place, again, the NIEM just doesn't care. It's out of scope for the NIEM. Now, there are training materials out there that go into some implementation details, and they'll tell you a little bit about web services, they'll tell you things like about the global reference architecture, and that's all good information, but I'll tell you, I'm not an implementer, so I'm not qualified to really tell you how to implement it. I don't know what your system is like, so even if I was an implementer, I wouldn't be able to tell you without spending time with you how to actually implement it within your environment. So I can give you some information, but I'm just taking a shot in the dark that it will apply to you at all. And I'd rather not do that. I'd rather, when it gets time for you to implement, that you seek out people with the experience in the development environment that you have and ask those people about how to implement within your development environment and within your privacy rules, within your security restrictions. That's all stuff that really needs to be done really in a personal way, in that you really need somebody to sit down and talk to you about it instead of me taking a stab in the dark. So, for the purposes of this training material, we're just going to punt. We're not going to tell you any more about implementation other than it's out of the scope of the NIEM. It's really important, and it's a really, really big piece of the puzzle. You know, it's making an IEPD is not much good if you don't then implement the exchange. But that said, there's nothing meaningful I can throw at you through the medium of remote training that will really help you do the implementation, because I just don't know where you're sitting and I don't know what environment in which you're sitting. Finally, a little licensing information about these materials. These materials are licensed under a Creative Commons license. What that means is that you can take these materials and distribute them yourself, or you can use them as a base for making derivative works. There are, however, two limitations involved. Limitation number one is that if you do distribute these works, you have to distribute them under a license identical to the one I'm showing you right now. And if you want more information about it, there's a URL on the screen. So if you distribute the works, you have to keep the Creative Commons license on them. The reason for that is that it ensures that other people can then take your work and do more stuff with it. These materials go back well over a decade in their original form, and they have been modified and enhanced throughout the years because this license protects the ability to do that. So it's very important. The second part of it is attribution. You need to give credit to the original authors of the work that you're using. So in this case, we're going to give credit to the various works that this work is based upon, and that's in the next slide. This particular work was funded by a grant from OJJDP, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. They're based upon other prior works. partially work done by the Department of Homeland Security under their own grant, and partially under work done over the years by the IGES Institute, the National Center for State Courts, and the Georgia Tech Research Institute. These materials are a combination of all those prior works modified and enhanced for the Children, Youth, and Family Services community.